Well, it appears as if I spoke a little too soon when I came to you on Sunday night and I said the Big 12 coaching carousel is done in college basketball. It isn't. I literally did that show, and within hours, Arkansas is landing John Calipari, and the college basketball world is completely upended. So here we are back with you on Heartland College Sports. I'm Pete Mundo. We cover the Big 12. Thanks for joining us, being a part of it. Hit that subscribe and thumbs up button right below the video on YouTube. And the podcast listeners, hit that 5-star rating and review. We appreciate you guys being here. So John Calipari on his way to Arkansas, that deal expected done as early as Tuesday. Now the question is, who's next? Well, there's 14 Big 12 coaches, if you want to talk about, the 14 we've got right now. And there's really only 3 guys that are even potentially in the mix as far as I see it for the Kentucky job. And those are Baylor's Scott Drew, BYU's Mark Pope, and Iowa State's TJ Otzelberger. That's it. That's where the list ends. There's no one else at this point to even consider. Now, the odds makers, if you look at what they've got, they have Jamie Dixon getting odds. They have Kelvin Sampson getting odds. They have Jerome Tang getting odds as well from Kansas State. And even Bill Self, according to the odds makers, is 50-1 to be the next Kentucky basketball coach. I think you're better off burning your money than betting on Bill Self to be the next Kentucky coach. But hey, John Calipari did just take the Arkansas job after all, so crazier things have happened. That being said, Scott Drew is an overwhelming favorite to be the next head coach at Kentucky. He is 1-1 to be the head coach of the Kentucky Wildcats. And when you look at Scott Drew, you say to yourself, okay, I get the appeal from the standpoint of Kentucky. The guy's obviously had tremendous success. He's a program builder. He's not bringing in, one-and-done guys with an antiquated model that brings you great athletes, but not necessarily great basketball players who know how to win. He does everything that Calipari in many ways does not do. He's the anti-Calipari. He's not a blowhard. He's not a guy who is, a lot of pizzazz, a lot of flash, sometimes lacks substance. Scott Drew is the opposite of that. He's a man of deep substance. He's a man who's, got incredible character, who's a program builder. So you understand why there's an incredible appeal to a guy like Scott Drew. But I'm sitting here and I'm saying to myself, okay, Scott Drew has turned down a lot of jobs. Is Kentucky really going to be the one that Scott Drew says, I need that one? I need to go to that job? Because we know that job can be very unappealing. In many ways, Kentucky basketball is in large part like Texas football. The booster situation is out of control. You are the biggest deal on campus. You're the biggest deal for miles. The expectations are to the moon. And even though Calipari won a national title and got the multiple Final Fours, it wasn't enough. Now, don't get me wrong. He's had a brutal half decade, right? I mean, since the COVID year, the guy hadn't been to a Sweet 16. I mean, it was very bad for John Calipari the last couple of years. He bombed out again when you look at this past season and what happened in March Madness. So, I get it. I'm not supporting or endorsing what John Calipari has done in his recent tenure. It has not been good. He had a great start to his career, but from there on out, it was all downhill. He has not been to an Elite Eight since 2019. And a Sweet 16 since then either, by the way. But his career started off great. He went to an Elite Eight, a Final Four. He won the national championship. 2 years later, he's the runner-up, Final Four, Elite Eight 2 years later. But it just has not reached expectations the last half a decade or so. So he decided to go to Arkansas. But for Scott Drew, the money is not going to be the thing. Kentucky can dump whatever money it wants on Scott Drew or anybody because they are saving themselves $32 million by not firing John Calipari. So that's a $32 million buyout they don't have to have and spend anymore. That's tremendous if you're the Kentucky Wildcats. So now you look at it and you say, okay, what could we do with that money? We can get whoever we want within reason. the money would be there for Scott Drew. His buyout's not big. It's like $4 million. That's nothing. The question is, does he want that environment? Does he want to change a pace? Does he want to be a guy who decides, I've done what I can do at Baylor. Now it's time for me to go do it at a true blue blood. What does Scott Drew want to do? That is the question. If he wants that job, it's likely his. The odds makers see him as the overwhelming favorite. So it's one of those things you have to at least understand and consider and say, okay, here's why this is something that would be appealing to both sides. But in the end, I believe that Scott Drew, who has turned down multiple other jobs around the country, is going to ultimately say, you know what? I got a good thing going here in Waco. I can win national championships here in Waco. I'm a perennial national contender. And guess what? I can get 5-star guys here. I don't need to necessarily go to a place like Lexington, Kentucky to get 5-star guys. I don't have to do it. Now, we understand he's buddies. He's friends with Mitch Barnhart, who is the AD at Kentucky, so that is obviously worth something. But I am not going to sit here and think for a second that Scott Drew is the guy that is just going to jump to Kentucky right now. I don't see it. On YouTube Live, we got this coming through. Kentucky fans are not excited about Scott Drew. Most of us, this is a Kentucky fan speaking on our YouTube page now. We appreciate you hopping on the show. Most of us have him in our second-tier coach choices with guys like Bruce Pearl. The first tier includes Danny Hurley, UConn, Nate Oates, Alabama, Billy Donovan, now with the Chicago Bulls, and Jay Wright. Well, let me just say this, and, I've been doing Heartland College sports and owning this operation for a decade. I started off my media career in Oklahoma. That's how I got my Big 12 itch. I'm now in Kansas City, but I'm actually a Villanova guy by trade. My wife and I met at Villanova, so my father-in-law is Villanova. We got deep Villanova roots. Jay Wright's not taking that job. I'm not saying you guys can't dream, but Jay Wright is not taking that job. There's not a chance in hell. Listen, I can be surprised, but I would be stunned if Jay Wright ends up in Lexington, Kentucky for this gig. He's got a great thing going. He's a legend where he is. He's the godfather of Villanova basketball. He has his, obviously, toes dipped in the water with the CBS gig. He is living life right now. You want to go back to the 24/7 grind of that in Lexington? I don't see it. Now, the other guys, Danny Hurley, listen, might win a national championship again. I get it. I think UConn will do what they have to do to keep him. And I think Danny Hurley's a Big East, Northeast guy. He came up the ranks in that part of the country. His father is a legendary New Jersey high school basketball coach. Danny Hurley screams Big East and screams UConn. He's got what he needs there. I don't see him going to Kentucky. For what purpose? Nate Oates, $18 million buyout at Alabama. That seems very unlikely. Billy Donovan, the most likely list of those guys is Billy Donovan. The Chicago Bulls are going nowhere. He's looking for a chance to maybe get back into the college ranks. He never did much in the NBA. Go back to what he's good at, see if he can build a program at Kentucky. That makes sense as much as anything. That being said, let's look at some of the other Big 12 names that are being talked about out there. The next one is Mark Pope. Mark Pope has the 5th best odds to be the next head coach of the BYU Cougars. Of the Kentucky Wildcats. He's with the BYU Cougars right now. Mark Pope played for Rick Pitino. He was on the 96 national championship team. So he's a guy who's got the ties. Now, listen, oftentimes the homecoming doesn't work like the fan base wants it to. The most recent example of a total bomb out is Scott Frost at Nebraska in college football. But really in any sport, it's not as big of a deal to have the guy with the ties as it was maybe a couple generations ago. It's overrated. However, Mark Pope has proven himself now, first season at BYU in the Big 12. He did a heck of a job, exceeded all expectations. Would he be in the first tier for Kentucky? Not a chance. Should he be in their first tier? Not a chance. But if they swing and miss on some other options, Mark Pope is a guy who at least is worth a look. Is he a guy that the fan base is going to be, jumping over mountains to get him here? No, that's very unlikely as well. But at least it's somebody who's got a tie, who's proven himself, who, has great respect and admiration and knows what it takes to win at a place like Kentucky. He's seen the best of the best do it in Rick Pitino. At least that makes a little bit of sense to me when you talk about the tie with Mark Pope and what Mark Pope brings to the table specifically for the Kentucky Wildcats. So you get the marriage there between Mark Pope and Kentucky. Do I think it's likely? No. Do I think it's what Kentucky ultimately wants? No. But if they can't get the guy or guys that they want, if those guys are not out there or they don't want to come, then Mark Pope is certainly worth a look. Now, what's interesting is when I look at this list and I see how the odds makers put it together, they had Mark Pope at 10-1 odds, fifth best odds to be the next head coach of Kentucky, behind Scott Drew, Nate Oates, Richard Pitino, Billy Donovan. Then Kelvin Sampson was 12-1. At this point in his career, Kelvin Sampson's not leaving Houston. His kid's on the bench. His kid's the coach in waiting. He's got a good thing there. Should have been in the Final Four this year, if not for the Jamal Shead injury. He ain't going anywhere. Jamie Dixon at 16-1 at TCU is interesting. I think Jamie Dixon's a great coach. He's disappointed in March. And Kentucky fans have seen enough of that in recent years. I don't think Jamie Dixon is a legit guy for Kentucky either. All the way down the list is TJ Otzelberger at 25-1 and Jerome Tang of Kansas State at 33-1. I would think if I was just placing money, I'm not saying that these guys will be the next head coach at Kentucky. But if Kentucky misses out on its top tier, I believe guys like TJ Otzelberger and Jerome Tang would be, and frankly should be, more appealing to Kentucky than some of these other guys on the list in that second tier, like a Sean Miller or a Jamie Dixon or a Kelvin Sampson. What TJ Otzelberger has done has been absolutely tremendous at Iowa State. Now, let's be very clear. TJ Otzelberger, the best thing he's got going for him is a $17.5 million buyout. And he loves Iowa State. I mean, he is that program. I'm not trying to take TJ Otzelberger down the road of like Matt Campbell offseason 7.0. Here we go again. It's the offseason. There's a big opening. Well, it's obviously going to be Matt Campbell. Like, I don't want TJ Otzelberger to become that guy in college basketball. But by the way, before Iowa State fans freak out, take this as a compliment. People want your dudes. And say what you will about Iowa State, and I love Iowa State, and I love the fan bases, but when we're talking about blue bloods here, like, Iowa State's not a blue blood. So it's okay. It's a compliment when your guys get brought up for big-time openings in college football or college basketball. It means you're doing something right. And thus far, you've proven that you can keep your guys. So I don't want to make it offensive here. I'm just pointing out that if I was Kentucky, TJ Otzelberger would have a lot of appeal to me if my first top-tier list does not work out. I mean, TJ Otzelberger took over a team at Iowa State that was 0-18 in the Big 12, 2-22 in Steve Prohm's last season. And he got him to the NCAA tournament each time. He's been the 2 Sweet 16s in 3 seasons after taking over an 0-18 Iowa State program in Ames. That's unbelievable. Now, once again, his buyout is to the moon. We're pushing 18 mil. But as I noted earlier, Kentucky saved $32 million by not firing John Calipari. So they've theoretically got that money in the bank if they so choose. Do I think Otzelberger is at the top of their list? No, I don't. But if guys like Billy Donovan and Jay Wright and Nate Oates and some of the others, Danny Hurley, don't want the job, they've got to look elsewhere. And then you maybe also talk about Jerome Tang, who just flirted with Arkansas. Now, I think he ultimately stayed because he knows he's got a good thing going at Kansas State. I think Jerome Tang's approach and style is much better suited for Kansas State than it is for a place like Kentucky. I think he realizes what he's got there. He's already got some built-in cachet with that Elite Eight run in year one. So, people are going to be hands-off for a while. He's ingratiated himself very well into Manhattan, Kansas. He's well compensated. He's got extensions, more money for his coaching staff, the whole thing. So he's got things where he wants it to be. To walk into that meat grinder and that fishbowl of Lexington, Kentucky is a completely different animal. And I don't think it suits Jerome Tang well. But once again, do I think that's something Kentucky would be wise to look at? If they don't get their top tier guys, I do. Why wouldn't they? They'd be foolish not to. So I don't ultimately think the Big 12 is going to lose one of their own here to Kentucky, but there's a handful of guys you can understand would at least be on that list. And those guys are Scott Drew at Baylor, Mark Pope at BYU, TJ Otzelberger at Iowa State. And if you want to go down that list, you look at a guy like Jerome Tang, maybe, but he's really on the outside looking in of what I would say is that top three. I don't buy Kelvin Sampson. I don't buy Jamie Dixon. I don't buy some of the other names that are showing up on that list. But these are going to be fascinating times, incredible days ahead in the college basketball coaching carousel. And I literally got so many comments from you on YouTube over the last 12 hours because I did a video on Sunday night saying the Big 12 coaching carousel is done. And I talked about Jerome Tang and how he was smart to not take the Arkansas job and why he did this little dog and pony show with Arkansas. I think he wanted to stick it to his university president, Dick Linton. And then the other reason, the other guy I talked about was Steve Lutz getting the Oklahoma State job. And I was like, all right, coaching carousel is done. We're on to something else. But no. John Calipari took that Tyson Foods money and had some other plans and decided he was going to bail on Lexington. And if you haven't seen the video, some local media got to John Calipari on Monday afternoon, and the guy's walking his dog, but he's got a dog stroller for the dog. I mean, John Calipari using a dog stroller is arguably a more fireable offense than his March Madness performance, for crying out loud. The only excuse for the dog stroller is if the dog is super old. But even if the dog is super old, you walk the dog as far as it goes to take a leak and, drop a deuce, and you move on with the day. And then you go back home. And the dog was walking, wasn't in the stroller. So I was just so confused. And I'm like, Cal, this is not the look. Not the look, brother. And I got a 20-pound Havanese. We found them under our car as a stray back in 2012 in Woodward, Oklahoma, when I was living out there and working at K101 Z92 radio. But, man, that was a tough look for Cal. He just looked like a beaten man, pushing his dog stroller, walking his little chihuahua. Shoulders were slumped over. I'm like, man, that guy is beaten. You sure you want that, Arkansas? You sure? Oh, man. Well, we appreciate you guys as always. Hit that thumbs up right below the video if you haven't yet. I know it sounds ridiculous, but it's a great way to help out the show. If you're new, if you love the Big 12, if you like following the Big 12, subscribe to the channel, subscribe to the podcast, and if you drop that 5-star rating and review, we will get you, as always, that Heartland College Sports koozie. Just send me a screenshot of that rating and review to Pete Mundo, Mundo, at heartlandcollegesports.com. And Big 12 fans are buzzing on our message boards about this very topic. Sign up. They're free. All we're looking is to build a Big 12 community and folks to hang out with beyond the chaos of social media. Click on the Members Forums tab at the top of the homepage at heartlandcollegesports.com, and we will talk to you guys soon. Have a great day. Go Big 12. Keep it close at Heartland College Sports so you know what's going on, because these next 48 hours are going to be very, very compelling. Talk to you soon. I'm Pete Mundo at Heartland College Sports. Go Big 12.